My name is Ben Grossman. Very happy to be back at Soccerex yet again. I'm lucky enough to be involved with my hometown club, Minnesota United, but my day job helps involving and overseeing football properties at Fox Sports, which puts me in the fortunate position of often working with the three gentlemen up here. So good morning to everybody here, and I'll now introduce everybody. John Christic sitting next to me, the president of Premier Partnerships, which is a longtime industry leader here of sponsorship sales and consulting. But for those of us in the soccer business, no matter what John does the rest of his career, the first line of his bio has already been written because John was the head of the United Bid Committee that helped land the 2026 World Cup for the US, Mexico, and Canada. So yes. And they said an American man would never win the World Cup, but here he is.
Not heard that one before.
Oleg, very welcome, very happy to have you here, head strategy and operations for Univision Deportes. For those of you who may not be familiar with the US television landscape as much, Univision is quite simply the longtime leader and standard bearer for Spanish language television across the board, but especially in sports here in the US and elsewhere. And if you don't believe me, when Mexico plays a game, just take a look at the ratings with Univision compared to Fox. We don't really like to, so you look at them. And finally, and very happily, welcome Philippe Maggio, the Secretary General and CEO of CONCACAF, the governing body of football in our region. I've had the pleasure of working with Philippe for many years, multiple hats. Philippe was helpful in helping bring the Gold Cup US opener to Allianz Field in Minnesota. Again, we're very thankful for the honor of doing that. And working together on many CONCACAF events on the television side as well. And with that, I'm kind of uniquely qualified to say that it's really been a pleasure to watch you and Victor and CONCACAF really usher in this new era in our region. So Philippe, welcome and very happy to have you here. A big round of applause for our panelists, please. Thank you. So we're going to talk about tournaments, the business of big tournaments here in the US and the Americas, and we're really in the halcyon days of football here in America, leading up through 2026 and potentially even 2027, which we'll talk about in a bit. And right now, we are literally in the midst of a wonderful new event around the region called the CONCACAF Nations League, and we're going to dive right into that. And before we do, Larry, we'd love to show them a little bit of how much fun this new product has been.
From Lozana Herrera! A stunner from Hector Herrera! And line, he dribbles it, cuts back, deflected up and in!
Excellent ball in, slid across, and ripped in. McKinney.
Zone. The zone going for goal! Another great save by Navas!
Menez with time and space, puts it in!
Three options in the box. It's Moya! And it's a goal for Honduras!
Lands it to the line, and this one goes past him! What a play on the road!
Sardes again going for goal! And it's 4-1 for the United States!
There, no foul in his favor. Still alive for Mexico. Jimenez puts it in the back of the net.
Blanco as well in the second half. His cross towards Ortiz at the back post, and it's the opening goal for Costa Rica.
Police into the box. Push it over, Kid's coming, and trickles on in. Douglas Martinez.
Green will take this one right into the middle, and it's a third goal for the United States.
And there it is. Yeah, it's been a great, fun new event. It's been fun here in America to watch it. I know it's been great for football around the region, which is a big goal of it. But Philippe, why don't you tell us about the formation of this event, why you did it, and how it's going so far?
Thank you, Ben, and it's great to be with Oleg and John sharing the stage here with you. And look, I have to say that at a personal level, this competition has been one of the most fascinating projects that I've ever been involved with in my life. Incredibly complex in terms of putting together a system, a format of competition and sort of breaking tradition from what's been done in the past. And when Victor Montagliani, our president, came into office, he looked at our overall competition structure and he said we needed to revamp everything. So we looked carefully at what's happening in UEFA with their Nations League and looked at what we had done in the past. And to put things in perspective, if we look at 4-year cycles between World Cups, we looked at what led to Brazil, for example, and the world qualification system that we had in place that's been established since the late 90s. 4 to 5 rounds of matches leading up to the Hex, where it's the top 6 teams from CONCACAF. But the previous rounds is essentially trying to get rid of as many members from competing as quickly as possible. And those members that lost in the early rounds would be out of any official competition in that 4-year cycle. So 2-3 years out before the next World Cup, they would not be able to bring their home, to play at home, to be able to tell the right stories for their players to be coming back, for their governments to get behind their programs, for infrastructure developments to be happening. So if we were to compare this cycle versus the last one, about half of our MAs would have been already out of World Cup qualification cycle. So we believe that creating an ecosystem of official competition between Nations League and World Cup qualification was essential. And we took many stabs at it. With the help of our members, we socialized different formats until we came with the format of Nations League. And now, having gone through the first edition of the group stage with 102 matches, after having qualified and essentially seeded the teams into each of the leagues, it's been fascinating. And we really believe that it's going to help competition, or at least a competitive level in our confederation, improve dramatically into the long term. We had 3 leagues competing. We had some fantastic storylines in terms of less developed nations competing really well and showing up. For example, Bermuda going to Mexico and almost holding them to a tie. We have the great final between US, Mexico, Costa Rica, and Honduras, having won their groups, now competing into what will be the final in June of 2020. So we think that what's happening is a great story. If you now compare the number of matches we'll have played in this 4-year cycle versus the previous one, would be close to 500 matches across our region versus less than 200 in the previous cycle. And we think leading to 2026 and beyond, that's really going to help create a more competitive balance in our confederation, and certainly help the smaller teams that previously hadn't had the opportunity to compete officially to be competing more and really spearheading a great program going forward.
Well, look, the matches have been on Univision, including the U.S. winning a big one for them the other night.
Yes.
Put them into the semifinals next summer. How's the tournament gone from your perspective in the first year?
Listen, I think the tournament is great. I think one of the phenomena that we're seeing over the past few years is that relevance of a game is the important thing that our audience is looking for, right? So previously we would have had, instead of the Nations League, we would have had friendly games. And what happens with friendly games is that the more people have choices for content, and the less time they have, they start to prioritize. And one of the things that's starting to happen is that people have become really picky about what they watch. And by putting some structure to what previously were just random FIFA dates, now you have those games that are relevant and that create some sort of storytelling throughout the process. And it helps you. It helps with audiences coming back and watching games that previously at Mexico, Bermuda probably wouldn't have happened, because Mexico would have played a friendly game against somebody else, and it wouldn't probably be as relevant as it was.
John, from a business standpoint, it's an interesting balance, right? Because you've got CONCACAF correctly wanting to raise the level of play across the entire region, but at the end of the day, when you're selling a final to brands or to television, you want US and Mexico in the final. Let's be honest. So how does that balance go from a business perspective?
Well, and it's a new event. and it's an event that it will take people a little bit of time to fully understand. But I think the way it's been organized right now, some of the competition that's already been created. I mean, just take the home and away legs for Canada USA. Right away, you're really starting to establish the credibility, and that, to me, from a brand's perspective, is part of the story that they need to start establishing in their mind, so that as this starts getting into its second and third iteration, I really think you're going to see more and more brands, particularly, let's face it, if you're a CMO today and you're not thinking about where football or soccer fits into your landscape between now and 2026, you're not doing your job. And the fact that there are these additional vehicles, because we all want to talk and celebrate the World Cup, but there'll also be limited opportunities there that are clearly going to come at a very premium price, and there's going to be category issues and everything else. So navigating a more medium to long-term strategy around events that you know are going to be here year in and year out is where the smart brands is going to start to go. So I applaud what they've built here, and don't underestimate how difficult it is to put something like that out into market.
Great. You talked about that marketplace, and there's so many, both club and country, so many competitions now in the marketplace. Let's talk about a couple of them and how they all fit together. Philippe, why don't you talk about where the CONCACAF Champions League is right now, as it's an exploding property?
Yeah, it's a lot of effort going in the overall club ecosystem and how we're going to develop club competitions. We've reformatted the Champions League, the Scotiabank CONCACAF Champions League 2 years ago. The format's doing incredibly well. I think we've seen great audiences in Univision behind it. It's a great platform for the rivalry between Liga MX and MLS come together. It's the way to get to the FIFA Club World Cup, and it's the way for all the other leagues across the region to really continue to improve and measure themselves against the top leagues in our region. Heading into next year's edition, we have the draw coming up in December 9th, and every edition we continue to see, the clubs really try to get it behind it in a meaningful way and understand better what this competition is, as well as the leagues. We see the path to what is going to be an increased Club World Cup in 2021 with more teams. So we'll have more opportunities for CONCACAF clubs to compete at the global stage. So obviously the relevancy of this competition is going to continue to increase. But more importantly, it's with that growth is what are we doing throughout the rest of the region to help the professionalization of leagues and clubs continue to improve through club licensing and other measures where we're very active.
It's a fascinating dynamic right now as the US and Mexico and Major League Soccer and Liga MX look for ways now to continue to expand this relationship. Great competition in CONCACAF Champions League, usually not to the benefit of the MLS team at the end of the day, unfortunately, but we'll see what happens down the road.
Stay optimistic.
Yes, absolutely. And another announcement just yesterday in Los Angeles at LAFC, Commissioner Garber, who just joined us earlier this morning, made the announcement that next summer in the Major League Soccer All-Star Game, a group of Liga MX All-Stars will play against a group of MLS All-Stars as we continue to see that relationship expand. Oleg, from your standpoint, first of all, talk about that All-Star Game itself as a standalone and what that means as we continue to see Liga MX and MLS look to build that bridge.
So I think the game as a standalone is a phenomenal thing, right? I think it acknowledges the fact that maybe a few years back we were trying to shy away from leveraging the relationship from a soccer perspective between the two countries. I think honestly, I think the MLS All-Star is somewhat a culmination of this whole 2026 roadmap, right? I mean, I don't see them as a separate part of the journey. I think this is just a point in time, which is a milestone where we are recognizing that together we're stronger from a soccer perspective, and I think. I'm terrible predicting things, but I can predict that this game probably is going to be the most watched All-Star in history, right? I mean, I'd support that. I would put money on that today. And I think that is, again, that is the end of a journey that starts everywhere. I mean, CONCACAF Champions League and everywhere. So I love it. I mean, I love that idea.
Yeah, and so we've got that. We've got other competitions between MLS at the cut of teams that finished just below CONCACAF Champions League and all of that. John, from a business standpoint, it seems like there's so much to be gained here. It's just kind of figuring out the right way to do it.
I mean, it's, you know, you take a step back. I mean, the U.S. in particular is still such a complex market when it comes to this sport. There's so many choices. And again, that's also opportunity as well. And I'm looking at it more from the brand's perspective of where do we come in and navigate our way through this ecosystem. It's such a typical market. If it's, you know, a major European or South American market, you know, everything kind of starts through your member association, through your national teams, you know, off to your professional leagues and your academies and everything else. Here, there's just so much choice and an abundance of choice. And I think what we as marketers really have to do, and event organizers and broadcasters, is take the time and don't underestimate the amount of education we have to continue to provide to the brands in these markets in terms of where these opportunities are and how they have to navigate through them. Too often when we, again, are trying to secure partnerships, we just jump to the chase and we think they get it. And unfortunately, they don't always get it. We have to explain it to them. So to me, I think these opportunities, to me, I mean, such as the All-Star Game, such as Nations League, such as Champions League, again, more opportunities for brands to associate with what we know is a sport on a very, very positive trajectory. But again, we have to work hard so that they get the returns back that they're going to expect from such an investment.
Yeah, it's a massive opportunity here in the States. I mean, please.
I think what you're saying is, look at this market. I think different to other markets in the world. Everybody wants a piece of it. So you have La Liga.
Park Avenue, they're all right there.
You have La Liga office here in the U.S. You have the Bundesliga office here in the U.S. You have teams, Manchester City investing in youth tournaments. Everybody wants a piece of this market. So I think if you come to the realization from a U.S. leagues, U.S. national teams, Mexican leagues, Mexican national team perspective, that you are the only one that to a certain extent can provide prime time, cohesive product, you either reap the rewards or somebody else is going to come and take them out.
Yeah, and the numbers are there, especially when you talk about Liga. You know, there's all this talk. There's a lot of attention paid because it's English language in the States to the English Premier League. Like, people think, oh, that's the most popular league in America. Not even close when you look at the television ratings. Liga MX is...
Yeah, by far.
By far, it's not even close.
Yeah. So, I mean, you look at the ratings and at Univision, we have the privilege of having around 80% of the primetime ratings of soccer in the U.S., regardless of language. So, and you see it. You see that it's not even close. You have the Mexican league being the number one, and you leverage on that. I think there's nothing wrong in leveraging. I mean, that's the way it is. And I think part of that and part of the growth of soccer in the U.S. is going to be driven by the MLS and the Liga MX doing things together.
Yeah, I applaud that as well. And again, not the effort for 26 was a team effort, but I must say the sincerity between the three partners, U.S., Canada, and Mexico, is really what opened the door to this. I mean, when they went into that joint bid, you know, egos were set aside, and it really was, listen, this isn't just about, you know, an event in 8 years' time, but, you know, how can we do that to foster more knowledge transfer, more collaboration between the three countries? And I really hope that'll be one of the best legacies that North American soccer is going to benefit from the World Cup. And I think the All-Star concept is just one of what could be many others to cooperate, see more cooperations.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about the bid. I mean, I was there, lucky enough to be there in the room in Moscow that day.
Yep.
There may or may not have been some screaming coming from our area as well. No offense to our friends from Morocco. But I mean, from a standpoint of getting, we talk about it casually, but I mean, Philippe, this is what you do all day. Getting US, Canada, and Mexico on the same page, getting them together to then go out and, do this bid that would ultimately be successful. I mean, talk about getting them on the same page, working together, what the challenges are of that, because it's kind of a look at what these tournaments are going to be potentially going forward.
Well, the good news for me, good and bad news, I first got involved in the bidding in 18 and 22, where I was managing director of the bid. And for those of you who don't read or live in a sandbox with your head under the sand, we didn't win. But learned a lot from that experience. So when the call came back to me, fast forward, I think it was in December of 2016, from Sunil saying, hey, listen, we are going to do this again. and is there a role for you that you want to play? And of course, my hand was very quickly raised and says, yes, didn't do this to lose the first time and not have a chance to come back. At that time, they had already made the general decision, okay, that it was going to be a joint bid with Canada and Mexico. So I can't take the credit for that. Though I will say that he didn't tell me that until like 2 days later after I had told him that I was all in again. He says, oh, by the way, just 2 other things, one of which is we're only going to have about 9 months to meet the bid requirements, whereas, and I know there's a few of the cities out there today, they'll remember the 1822 process and the journey we went to. We had about double that time. So this time it was going to be an expedited process. And then one more thing, okay, it is going to be a joint bid with Canada and Mexico. And again, beyond the excitement of, hey, yes, let's do this, I remember hanging up the phone and saying, I don't know how that's really going to work. But I must say, from the very first meeting we had with them, they were all in. And again, egos were checked aside. We had one common strategy. We had equivalent organizations in Canada and Mexico that all worked. When we spoke to Mexico City, it was the same way that we spoke to Kansas City. They were all being given the same guidance, the same instruction, the same message points. So it was a good litmus test for, I think, how ultimately the implementation of a joint bid of this significance will work in practice.
They all go that easily, right, Philippe?
Oh yeah, very easily. It's actually a great story to see the 3 countries come together, and if you look at it from a global perspective as to what that means, it's really setting precedents, right? One, because this is going to be the first World Cup that's expanded to 48 teams. So co-hosting is now a way of the future. There's going to be very few countries that can actually host a 48-team World Cup. So there's going to be the sample and the setting of the bar for these 3 countries as to what they can do and what happens across each of the cities. But it's also about, at least from a CONCACAF perspective, it's about the roadmap there, right? And what are we doing to really harness the power of our World Cup coming back to our region? Since 1994 was the last time that a men's World Cup was played in the CONCACAF region. It's a tremendous opportunity, and we see it day to day in everything that we're doing. So with the right narrative, going back to the story about how do we make this ecosystem so complex, telling the right narrative, doing the right development efforts, working hand in hand with the 3 host nations, but ensuring that it's a CONCACAF World Cup, meaning that the legacy helps the entire region lift from a football perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, from a social responsibility perspective. So that's our work, and that's what we'd be pushing very hard, not only our 3 members, but certainly at FIFA, to ensure that we harness the power of this World Cup in 26.
So you kind of glossed over a point that's really massive when you think about putting on big tournaments anywhere in the world now, as the World Cup has expanded to so many teams, that how many countries now can actually host one solo that big? How many have the infrastructure? So if that's the case, boy, are there a lot of dominoes that fall from that. Oh, look, I've talked to our friends at ESPN who are going to do the same thing you are next summer at the European Championships, which are all over Europe. From a logistical standpoint, from a cost standpoint, from everything like that, what a different world it is to cover a tournament like that.
It is, and I think that's the new reality. Especially with World Cup, I don't even think we keep saying there's few countries. I don't think there's a single country that can hold 48 teams with. It's going to be tough. So I think from an audience perspective, it doesn't really make a difference. You watch it on TV, stadiums are going to be full. You don't even realize that the distance between Baku and London is massive. From a logistical and production standpoint, is big, and what's happening now is the major events are becoming more major, if I can say that. I mean, the bigger they're growing, and we're trying to expand these things. For us as a broadcaster, it's very costly to start covering these types of events because we can't be in every single city where the tournament is going to be played. And same as ESPN. I mean, we made the decision that we're going to go to London, which is going to be the city that's going to have most games throughout the tournament, and we're going to be there.
Semis and the finals.
Semis and the finals, and we'll be there. We'll cover it. I'm going to venture to say it's going to be the best covered and distributed Euro ever in the U.S. And so we'll see. I mean, I think it's going to be a great tournament.
John, why is it so hard? I mean, even for an expanded tournament, all you need is just stadiums to host an event, right?
It was a bit of a lead-in, wasn't it? I mean, again, to pick up on Oleg's point, first of all, I do think the joint bid model is the trend of the day, and I think for a lot of the right reasons. And there's a lot of benefit to that in that you're not going to put such an enormous amount of responsibility and cost, particularly from an infrastructure standpoint, on any one single country to bid host an event of that magnitude. At the same time, that's also going to raise additional risks, though, when you have not necessarily just 3, but sometimes 4, sometimes 5 countries that are going to be coming together. The good side, hopefully they have a lot of the infrastructure already in place, because I think we all know that that's one of the not great legacies that a lot of major events have left, okay, over the last couple of decades, is building stadiums that are being used one time and not again. And I think that's an unfair responsibility to be putting on hosts just to host a soccer tournament. So I think the joint bids will continue, but they will also create more administrative and logistical complexities, whether it's production, in different countries. If it's in different parts of the world, we have different currencies, across different bids. How your immigration, your visas are going to work, how you're going to move team medical equipment from one country to the next. All these additional things will just take a lot more time and organization to put in place. Now, the good news with a property like FIFA, that they understand that. I know the bid regulations require a lot of that to be built into it, but we also know that during a bid, it's very easy to get everyone to say, yes, we'll do it, yes, we'll sign it. There are also a group of professionals who have to roll up their sleeve and make sure that that all can be delivered at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So there's definitely complexities to that. I mean, you mentioned about the stadiums. These events are beyond just a stadium-led relationship between a property, FIFA, or a host, U.S. Soccer, Canada, Mexico, and a city with a stadium. The cities have to be involved across all stakeholders in their communities. For those of you who don't know, for a city to be involved in a World Cup bid, they had to commit and sign a number of documents that cover host city agreements, stadium commitments, training sites agreements, airport agreements. All of these things have to be in place. And those stakeholders have to be very, very organized and understand how they're going to work off of each other. If you think you can just do it through the stadium, that's only one small piece of it. Fortunately, in these 3 markets, the stadiums are in place. There was no promise to FIFA that, hey, if you come here, we'll build all of these. They're in place. They're also benefiting from content that's being driven by the NFL that's guaranteeing innovation, guaranteeing that these stadiums are constantly upgraded. So there's no concern from the FIFA perspective that they're not going to be playing in the most state-of-the-art places, which gives more time to ensure that all the other pieces are coming together.
It's a mess.
You for sure will have great contrast between Qatar and the US.
Yeah.
Qatar, the furthest distance between 2 stadiums is 50 kilometers.
Yep.
So that's going to be the last time something like this, because of the expansion of teams,
48, yeah.
that you're going to be able to do it. The contrast is going to be massive.
Right. Yeah, literally. Massive undertaking. We didn't even talk about, if you're going to have a 48-team tournament, training centers for every team. I mean, it's such a huge part of that goes into it. So I want to go back a little bit and talk about another event or potential event. And Philippe, I'm not going to put you on the spot on this one, so I'm going to talk to these guys for a second. In 2016, we had a wonderful event, the Copa America Centenario, where we had CONCACAF and CONMEBOL teams together here in the U.S. in a tournament that was wildly successful. Nothing yet on the horizon. We'll see if something happens down the road. Is it an inevitability? How powerful would it be to find another formal tournament or a series of such that gets club teams or national teams, in this case, together, bringing CONMEBOL and CONCACAF together?
So I think if you take a look at what's happening now in the U.S. with the joint bid, with Europe expanding Euro to different countries, with MLS doing the game, the All-Star game with League MX, with League MX and MLS doing joint tournaments, it's the point I made at the beginning, which is the relevance of the tournament, is starting to hit hard. I mean, the amount of inventory that you have of tournaments and of games, and you can watch games in the US in so many networks, and it's driving confederations and leagues to start thinking about, how do I leverage the resources that we together have in order to maximize the economical value of my property. right? I mean, because at the end of the day, every single league and every single confederation is looking for that. Is how do I make sure that the property that I have now grows soccer in my region, but also brings the economic resources that I have to expand. I think, and to the second point I made, which is everybody wants a piece of this market, is it's only by looking at the average ticket price of that you can command in the US by playing a game here that could be played in Rio or in Argentina. Only by that you increase the value of a certain property. But I think the only way that happens, and this is to John's point, and that's everybody has to come to the table and take their egos out. And saying, guys, we're going to do this for the benefit of the confederations, the benefit of the audience, the benefit of soccer, and take away everything else. Unless that happens, I see it very difficult for an intercontinental Copa America to happen anytime soon.
And if I can weigh in on that one, obviously Copa America Centenario was a tremendous success, and it really set the momentum for us to get on this path and really turn around CONCACAF. The opportunity is massive that exists and the potential collaboration with other confederations. In the back of that, we had a tremendous 2017 Gold Cup. We had a 2019 Gold Cup that was the best ever in terms of attendance, audiences, competitive levels, expanded to 16 teams. So we're very focused on continuing to grow what we can control. We're very focused on 21 and 23, which are in the FIFA calendar, and we're building towards those. And obviously heading towards 27, there's going to be many other opportunities to think about cross-confederation competition and other activities, not only at the national team level, but certainly at the club side as well.
Yeah, and real quick, as we go to this expanded World Cup, boy, it completely changed qualifying for CONCACAF, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We're going to have more teams that are going to be able to qualify. We'll have 3 slots that are going to a 24-team Club World Cup that FIFA announced in November that it's going to take place in China. We think obviously China's going to get behind it in a very meaningful way. Our qualification process for that is obviously going to increase the visibility of what the Champions League is about. So we're incredibly excited about it, and we know that it's going to impulse the growth of club competition in our region.
And then at the national team level, the same thing. The quote-unquote hex where you'd fight to get into and all that, now that's going to completely change going forward. That's a tough thing to...
Absolutely, and when we talk about Nations League and creating this ecosystem and World Cup qualification, it's now you see the FIFA rankings become so relevant, right? Because everybody's looking and see how they can get into the hex.
Do you want to stop and explain that for people who don't know the change you've made on that?
Absolutely. So because we've created Nations League and we had to shorten the tail or the beginning part of World Cup qualifying so that every one of our federation could compete during those windows, we put World Cup qualifying into a 10-match window calendar. So the concept of the hex still exists, but the way you get into it is through the FIFA ranking. So every competition today is informing that ranking, and it's going to take the top 6 into that World Cup qualifying hexagonal. But the great thing about it is the rest of the federations will have the opportunity to continue to compete for World Cup qualifying in group stages below to earn a half spot that will play against the 4th in the hexagonal. So everybody's still relevant, competing for World Cup qualifying instead of being out 2 or 3 years before the World Cup. And we believe that is also going to help the competitive level increase in our region.
As a fan of the U.S. national team, thank you. Want to, as we are here in America, I want to make my last question, then we'll open it up to some questions from the crowd about one of our strengths here, which is our women's football here in the U.S. Philippe, it's becoming an increasingly important thing for CONCACAF. You've brought in Karina LeBlanc to be your head of women's football. KK, are you here? Hey, there she is. KK is speaking later this afternoon, around 2 o'clock or something, I think. I don't remember what time, but go see her. We were in Paris this past summer for the CONCACAF Congress. She gave a talk and blew the doors off. She's fantastic, so come out and see KK, please. Checks in the mail, right, KK? Thank you. But yeah, she's fantastic. You guys are making it a big, talk about that and the growth that you've seen and what you've got planned on the women's side.
Absolutely. It's women's football is a top priority for CONCACAF. Bringing Corina on board, it's been a fantastic addition to our efforts. She helped us put in place our strategy for women's football, which we unveiled at the Congress in Paris, and we're now working behind. 2020 is going to be a tremendous year for women's football at CONCACAF. We have the Women's Olympic qualifiers where we're investing a lot in order to really build the activation and what's happening not only at the local level, but certainly behind the broadcast. So we're very excited about that competition. But then we also have under 20s, under 17s, U15s, all on the women's side in 2020. So we have over 1,400 women and girls competing in CONCACAF competitions, and that gives us a tremendous platform to build development activities around those competitions on the refereeing side, on the social responsibility perspective. So we're going to be busy in 2020 and beyond, obviously, as we continue to elevate women's football and harnessing the power of what the U.S. national team did in the back of the France World Cup.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of working on the last 2 Women's World Cups, and the television ratings here in the States are astronomical for that in both 15 and this past summer in 19. And there's a lot of talk now. So the 2023 Women's World Cup has not yet been awarded. That will happen early next year. We'll find out where that is. U.S. not bidding for that one. But we expect the U.S. will be in the mix to host the 2027 Women's World Cup, which would be just 1 year after hosting a Men's World Cup. From a business standpoint, that's a heavy lift. Forget about logistics. From a business standpoint, for brands, television, and all that, talk about how that would work back to back.
I think the appetite's there for it, though. Okay. I mean, don't forget as well, in 28 we have an Olympic Games that are also going to take place in the United States. But certainly to me, in terms of the relationships, the infrastructure that you have put in place for 26, to be able to extend that to 27, if that's something FIFA ultimately decides is right, I think the capacity is here, and I think the enthusiasm. We've all lived through something very, very special, or we're living through something very, very special right now with the women's game. And I think for those of us in the business, I think doing everything we possibly can to make this sustainable. We know, as exciting as it is, there are still challenges to make a sustainable women's product, but I think we all owe it to ourselves. And to me, if there's another North Star that sit alongside the World Cup men's in 26, that's the Women's World Cup in 27, that would be a nice thing to help build the momentum around.
Absolutely fantastic. We've got just a minute or 2 left, so if there's anybody who's got a question, I think Larry's got a microphone out there. Raise your hand. Does anybody have any questions? Larry, you want to? Yeah? And do us a favor, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, please.
Hi, my name is Kevon Antonio, and I've been to a few World Cups, maybe 8 or so. And the question is, before the World Cup, they used to try things out with the Confederations Cup and other tournaments. So how do you try out logistically and all the elements a 3-country World Cup before a 3-country World Cup comes up?
It's a good question. You're right. Previously, the test event was defined as the Confederations Cup, and we know that that's no longer in place. So there's still an area that FIFA has not yet provided the guidance in terms of what the test event will be in 2025. There's one defined that there will be a test event. Just don't know what that is yet. But for sure, we're not worrying about testing whether new stadiums are able to manage a lot of traffic. We're proving that every day at our facilities. We're not having to prove whether our airports are able to manage a lot of capacity. So a lot of the traditional concerns that the test events have to serve, I believe, are in place. That doesn't mean we still don't have to test the logistics, how the World Cup overlay, because we all know an NFL stadium is designed to operate one way around an NFL football type event, and if you're going to have a World Cup, it's a completely different kettle of fish, as they would say, in terms of the way the overlay works. So those things will have to be tested. And again, we don't know yet what the answer will be. Maybe it's the Club World Championships. I mean, that would be an obvious one to consider. An event that's the size of the first World Cup that was in the U.S. in 1994. It would be 24 teams and 52 matches. But that's still TBD.
Hugely important. It's a great question. And from a television standpoint, I'll give you a quick story. Look, you'll appreciate this one. We were doing our first World Cup on Fox in Russia in 2018, so we did the Confederations Cup the year before to get through it. So we've got our studio set up that we're going to use and all of that. We're on air. Everything's going great. Suddenly we lose we lose our transmission. Oh God, what happened? And we find out that we had run our cables across a street that was closed down, except for the street sweeping machines, which come by once in a while. It came through and literally cut our cords, and that's how we lost it. So yeah, the learning's it's actually a really good question, really important on a lot of things. Don't run your cords across. Yeah, it's important. Any other questions before we go?
Don't sweep the streets.
All right, great. Well, then we'll head out. I want to thank Philippe, Oleg, and John. This was a great conversation, a lot of fun. And thank you all for coming. Thank you very much.